Everyone would love for this trial to happen as soon as possible. But what's taking so long? Hey everyone, it's Lucky with Unfiltered Lucky. And today I want to talk a little bit about the statement that was just recently released by the Goncalves and Kernodle family with regards to their frustration that there hasn't been a date set yet for this trial. These families are getting frustrated because they feel like this trial continues to be kicked down the road. And I really don't blame them. These Idaho 4 crimes happened almost 16 months ago, and they've had Bryan Kohberger in custody for almost 15 months. So we know that this is a capital case, and we know that this trial is going to take some time. There were 4 victims, which basically means 4 investigations. So there's a lot of evidence and there's a lot of witnesses that need to be processed before this trial can move forward. There's different agencies who have worked in this investigation. Now, it kind of seems as though these agencies basically worked separately. So now the prosecution needs to gather up all of this evidence from all of these different agencies so that they can pass that along to the defense. It's understandable that a crime of this magnitude would take some time to get to trial. But think about this. Law enforcement has allegedly assured the families of these victims that they have an overwhelming amount of evidence against Bryan Kohberger. This is their man. And for almost 15 months, the families of these victims have had faith in law enforcement that they have the person who committed this quadruple homicide. Now, I don't believe that the families have any proof that Bryan Kohberger committed this crime. I don't believe that they have any solid proof because they've been kept in the dark as much as everyone else. And I believe that if they did have solid proof, they wouldn't continue to be looking for answers. So it seems as though the families of these victims have really had no choice but to put their faith in law enforcement throughout this investigation. But now they're watching the prosecution fumble around with the discovery. I'm sure the families have the same questions as a lot of us have. If the prosecution has all of this evidence that proves that Bryan Kohberger committed these crimes, why don't they just present this evidence so that we can move forward with this trial? If the evidence is so strong against this defendant, then why continue to make the families wait for justice? Now, Ann Taylor stated out loud in this last hearing that she would like to see all of the evidence that the prosecution has before she issues a complete alibi for Bryan Kohberger. Well, yeah, it's always nice when you see them coming. The prosecution stated in this last hearing in court that they have submitted approximately 95% of their evidence to the defense. So we can assume that this last 5% must be the goods, right? I mean, if they've already submitted the majority of their evidence and Ann Taylor is still having problems figuring out why law enforcement even arrested her client, then this last 5% of evidence that the defense is waiting for must be good. But what if it's not? What if this last 5% has no substance at all? The families have been waiting for this. The families have been assured that law enforcement has a mountain of evidence against Bryan Kohberger. But what if they don't? And this is what the families have been waiting for. These families have been waiting for justice, and they've been waiting for the prosecution to present that mountain of evidence that they have against Bryan Kohberger. But where is it? Where is this mountain of evidence? Is it maybe in that 51 terabytes of information that the prosecution dumped on the defense? Does it not seem weird that the prosecution just dumped 51 terabytes of information in the defense's lap so that they have to play needle in a haystack in order to find the parts that they're looking for? I mean, doesn't it seem as though that the prosecution might highlight the parts that show that Bryan Kohberger is guilty? I mean, to dump 51 terabytes of information on the defense without highlighting the good parts basically means that Ann Taylor and her team are going to have to sift through all of this information, which may not have any value at all. They don't know. They have to look through all 51 terabytes of this information, which is obviously going to push this trial back even further, because now the defense is going to need more time. It's strange. I mean, the prosecution was ready to go to trial this summer, but they don't even have all of their evidence together. This is a capital case, and the prosecution has assured these families that they have the evidence in order to convict Bryan Kohberger. But where is it? Where is this evidence? The prosecution keeps saying, we got this guy. But when is the gotcha part gonna happen? These families have to be feeling kind of concerned at this point. They have to be wondering in the back of their minds, is the prosecution's case as strong as they've been told that it is? Now, they're waiting to see this damning evidence. I think we're all kind of waiting to see this evidence that proves that Bryan Kohberger committed these crimes. We're all waiting for this big revealing from the prosecution, and waiting and waiting. Now, I can understand why the families of these victims are feeling frustrated. The prosecution has been assuring these families that we have this guy. This is our guy, and we have the evidence that it's going to take to convict him. But I'm kind of getting the feeling that maybe the families of these victims are also maybe questioning the actions of the prosecution. Now, we all know that this is a capital case. This trial is going to take some time. But if the prosecution has the goods on Bryan Kohberger, as you would think that they do, anytime you put the death penalty on the table, you can usually assume that the prosecution has the goods on the defendant. But I think that just as we're all waiting to see the goods on Bryan Kohberger, so are the parents of these victims. And they might be starting to feel a little iffy about whether this prosecution's case is as strong as they've been led to believe. We're all waiting for this information. We're all waiting for these pieces to begin to fit together. And so far, they're just not. This is just my opinion. But when I watch this prosecution in the courtroom, I don't get that feeling of confidence. And the families of these victims are also watching this prosecution. And I have a funny feeling that they might not be getting that feeling of confidence either. It seems as though they're becoming rather concerned, and it's really kind of hard to blame them because this prosecution does not seem to have everything together. This is not running smoothly for the prosecution. So I can understand the concern of the families of these victims as they watch this prosecution in court. I think that the families felt like this evidence that, proves that Bryan Kohberger is guilty would be coming out by now. That the prosecution would be presenting all of this evidence that they have. All of this damning evidence that they have against this defendant. It would seem like that evidence would be coming out by now. At least some of it. But so far, we really don't have anything. We've got the DNA, which that's a big mess because you have the IgG and you have the prosecution trying to pull the switcheroo with the DNA. So the families are seeing this. The families are seeing this happen. I really truly believe that the parents of these victims are watching this prosecution and maybe having some doubts about how the prosecution is handling this case. Because as I've said, law enforcement has continued to reassure these families that they have the goods on Bryan Kohberger. But what if they don't? Now stay tuned for my next video. Tomorrow we're going to be talking about the Alec Baldwin, Hannah Gutierrez Reed rust incident in New Mexico. And this is a case that I have been following since the very, very beginning. I wasn't really going to make any videos about this. This was kind of something that I was just following because it was something that I was interested in. But a lot of you have asked me to talk about this case. So tomorrow, I'll be uploading my first video about this rust incident that happened just outside of Santa Fe, New Mexico. It's going to get really interesting, and there's a lot of details in this crime that we should probably talk about and go over because there's a lot of details in this crime that I'd really love to get your input about and hear what you think about it. So look out for that tomorrow, and thanks for hanging out with me today. I really do appreciate it. And if you like my content, please hit the like button and please subscribe. I really do appreciate it. We'll see you next time.